It tells us in Matthew 13:55, it asks the question, is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? There's a declaration and acknowledgement of these people in the life of Jesus Christ during his ministry. And it says right there, is this not his mother? Mary. So we see that during the time of Christ's life and during the time of his ministry, she didn't check out at any point. There's a reason for that. It's because God didn't just ask Mary to bear Jesus Christ, he asked her to mother him. And there's a big difference. There's a big difference. So I want us to talk about that today. I think it'll help us out in the fact that this is what it takes, and this is what God asks us to do. He asks us to grow in our faith. He asks us to step up, to keep growing, to be able to grow and adapt to all the tasks and roles that he gives us during life. At certain points, it's being a young person, a young adult, jobs, marriage, then being a parent, which is one of the greatest tasks of all. And I hate the fact that sometimes it feels like our society has diminished the value of that because it's totally wrong and unfair. The value of being a father and mother is of the greatest value that exists among humanity. And it's definitely worthy for us to be able to stand up and declare and praise. Edith Dean wrote this. She wrote the book, All of the Women in the Bible. She states the obvious when she says, as the mother of Jesus Christ, Mary stands apart from all women in history. In art, music, and literature, she has become the embodiment of all that is fine and noble in womanhood. No woman in the entire history of the world has been so honored and revered. Now, there's a lot of controversy and extra biblical things that have been heaped on her, just I think like you would on any hero, but on her more and more stuff. And part of it is because of false worship, and there's a lot of the adaptations from the Babylonians and the Romans who had the Babylonian gods and all their gods and their mother ideas of everything. They kind of adapted that to Mary, which was totally unfair, unbiblical, unscripted, and unwanted. And so we're not going to get into that controversy. We're just going to talk about what the Bible says strictly about Mary, because from that, what we see is a very pure, a very honest, and a very wonderful adaptation of a young woman, from being a young woman asked to bear the child, then also to mother that child all the way through from birth to, and unfortunately in this case, and to death. And how in the world was she going to be able to do that? And God fulfilled the promise, you see, that he had given Adam and Eve when he said that the seed of woman would come and would be the Messiah, would crush the head of Satan. He fulfilled that in this young woman that was born in this small little place in the whole world, in Israel, in Nazareth. A young woman who was really normal and what we would say unremarkable. And yet she was special and very remarkable. Why? Because by God's design, he had this young woman who was not any different than other young women, mentally, emotionally, and physically. She was one of us. She wasn't Supergirl. She was just a normal human being. But there was one thing that set her apart, and it's the same thing that sets apart every woman of all time. It's the same thing. And that is she trusted God. She trusted God. She had the faith that she had developed as a child because, as with all human beings, nobody is born with spiritual advantage. God did not impute upon her a spiritual, superhuman person. She was a young woman raised up in a culture that accepted and heard the words of God, and she accepted that, built a relationship with God, cultivated it. By the time God was going to use her, she was a pious young woman who was trying to please God all that she could. And she did it because she trusted God. And that's where we all start. Every place that we find ourselves in life, we have to start where we are, when we are, and decide how much do I trust God in this next step of my life, how much in the next phase. Now, granted, none of us were put on what God put on her. But he just didn't pick whoever. Yes, she was unremarkable in the physical, mental, emotional things. Extremely remarkable in her faith. And that's how we should all strive to be. I think people, and the injustice about Mary is that they made her out to be something so superhuman that no woman or no young woman or man would even look and say, well, I can be like that. I can have the faith of Mary. We think that she was supernatural some way. She wasn't. She was unremarkable in all those aspects. Only remarkable in the fact that at the given point of time, she had enough faith and trust in God to say, then I guess I will do that. In fact, her very first words in the Bible that we'll find out were a question. Basically, whenever Gabriel came and he declared, he said a bunch of words, right? And all of a sudden, her question was, well, I mean, even a young girl from Jerusalem understands biology. And she says, I can be a person of faith, I can love God, but I've never been with a man. Right? So God had to take care of that as well. All he asked of her was to work and to act on the faith that she had in God up until that point. So go with me to Luke chapter 1, verses 27 through 38. I know it's not Christmas, and it sounds like Christmas, but there's a lot about Christmas that isn't about trees and lights and glitter and mangers. A lot of it has to do with the faith that God had received from the people who are the players, Joseph and Mary and all those people. And one of the things that we see in Mary was the remarkable faith that she had. So it says in Luke chapter 1, verse 27. Let's start in verse 26. In fact, I know it's not there, but let me start there. It says, now in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and having come in, the angel said to her, rejoice, highly favored one. The Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women. And so here's the declaration. But when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying, and considered what manner of greeting this was. And the angel continued and said to her, do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and shall call him his name Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. And he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Now I'm thinking right there, you're pretty much floored. It reminds me of what happened in the Old Testament, right, with Jeremiah and these other prophets, when there are very few times God says, like to Jeremiah, I'm going to make you a person who speaks to the kings of this world. I have a great task for you. Most of us don't get that revelation. Quite frankly, we would all freak out. And yet somehow, some way, she didn't go out of the house screaming when you think about it. Verse 34, then Mary said to the angel, this is her first words in the Bible, how can this be since I do not know a man? That sounds like a pretty calm statement from a young woman who is looking at having to give birth in a culture where this was almost death. Whenever she had not been married, she hadn't been with a man. In fact, she was even betrothed to be married, which was literally an act of infidelity as much as adultery would be, and an act worthy of being stoned to death. So you with me? So I thought it was a pretty calm response. Verse 35, the answer said to her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the highest will overshadow you. Therefore also that Holy One who is to be born will be called the Son of God. Verse 36, now indeed Elizabeth, your relative, has also conceived a son in her old age. This is John the Baptist, we'll know later. And this is now the 6th month for her who was called barren, for with God nothing is impossible. Then Mary said, behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word. And the angel departed from her. So she was an extraordinary person of trust. We say the word faith, and it sounds very spiritual, but it really is trust and confidence. And so she had trust and confidence when this declaration was made. I mean, sometimes people can say, well, was that a dream? Was that real? Was this person real? But there was everything that God did that led her to this point that established that this was of God, an angel of God, a declaration of God, and this was to be fact. And so at the very beginning of her motherhood was an act of extraordinary faith, but it wasn't the end of her faith. And this is what I want to get to. God will bring you all to a place where you need to respond to him. For a lot of us, that's actually at the new birth. That's actually whenever we say, I do believe that I'm a sinner and I am separated from God by my sins. I do believe that God loved me so much that he sent Christ. I do believe that he is the only one. I need to accept him and have my nature put in Christ to come to, that right there is a huge step of faith. And many people don't make it to that place or past it. But here we are with Mary. She's at this place, probably had come to a true faith in God earlier in life, and that faith leads her to this place. So here's little Mary of Nazareth, been given this great task that Gabriel brought to her. And now she goes on with life. And basically, remember, there's never a time in our life or her life, as we'll see, that when God says, okay, you did this one great thing. You would think to Mary, right? Okay, you went through this. Nobody's had to go through this. You had to survive it in a culture that would have killed you. You have your husband who backed you up. You gave birth to a child and you'd never known a man, never been with a man sexually. That's what it means. And you made this, he said, God could have said, that's the greatest thing I've ever seen. From now on, you just cruise on and you're good. And that's not what happened. And it's not what happens with us. How many of us have been on a pinnacle, on a high, whenever God did something great? It was a miracle, it was wonderful, it was amazing. We feel like, wow, God is real. This is amazing. And then the next day you wake up and something else happens. And then the next day, and all of a sudden later on, even though you had that great mountaintop experience, you're going to have to face issues of faith again. You're going to lose jobs. You're going to lose people. You're going to be slapped in the face. You're going to be hurt, right? And so then you have to continue to face life. Mary was this way. We don't see a lot about Mary other than her being a mother of Jesus, but that alone reminds me of some very important things, and I want you guys to see some of these things, and I think it will help you in your ability not only to become mothers, but to stay mothers. Not only for us to become fathers and people who are guardians and helpers, but to understand that the faith required to raise up children is something that never ends. We, in fact, need to get better and better and better, because many of you will testify that your adult children brought you a lot more trials and tribulations than you did your little children. And the problem then is you have a lot less control. And so you're weeping and saying, God, help me, help them. I don't know what to do. I'm trying to help, and they're just telling me, get out of my face. I'm saying that this idea of Mary's great faith did not begin nor stop at the birth of Jesus Christ. Many other things happen. And so I want to touch a few places. I want to talk about the growing up of Jesus. And I want to talk about some of the ministry things that she had to face. And I want to talk about the fact that she literally had the nerve to take the steps. Can you imagine how your legs and how your knees and how you would have felt to take the steps to go to the foot of the cross? And to know how unjust people were murdering your child. And to be able to do that. And there's a reason why she could, and we're going to talk about that. But I think about the time when Jesus was growing up. So here she was, she gave birth, and we don't know how the baby Jesus was. We don't know what he did, how he was. And we know he was a perfect child, but he was a human being. I don't know. I know that, he probably didn't change his own diapers. I always tease my daughters. Whenever they were little girls, I would say, yeah, when I was a kid, I didn't mess with all that stuff. I said, I changed my own diapers. I went to the refrigerator and I got my own milk when I was hungry. I did all that. Dad, that's not true. And I never said that in the presence of my mom, who would have called me a liar to my face. But they thought that was funny. It's funny because it's so ridiculous, right? So we don't know exactly how it was with Jesus. We know he was a perfect human being. His nature was not a sin nature, but God gave him a human nature. We don't understand. That is a mystery to us because we've never seen it. We have no point of reference for that. And as some people say, can you imagine being the brothers of Jesus? Oh, well, Jesus wouldn't have done that. Yeah, Jesus is perfect, right? I know, right? Now, the other part about Mary is, because we talk about the half-brothers and sisters of Jesus, and there's a lot of history about, was that because Joseph was married before and had children, and then Mary helped raise them? We have nothing in the Bible that says that. Those are historical things that people came in later because they wanted to venerate Mary as an eternal virgin and all this stuff, which is totally unnecessary. Like I said, you don't have to turn her into a superwoman. The Bible didn't say it. She was just a woman, but a woman of faith. And that's the point, a woman of faith. A faith that didn't stay stagnant, a faith that was forced to grow up with the young Jesus. And here we find in Luke chapter 2, I'm going to read these, Luke 2, 45 through 52, it gives us a story of the young Jesus, 12 years old, around that time. Luke 2, 45 to 52, so when they did not find him, so they took Jesus from Nazareth, they went to the temple, they did all the worship stuff, and the city of Jerusalem swelled from 250,000 to 750,000 people. There were swarms of people. They went in big groups, family groups. And so they did all they were supposed to do, and then everybody turns around. They're going back to Nazareth, and a couple of days afterwards, they found out that Jesus was not among them. Now, I can imagine a 12-year-old Jesus wasn't like a 12-year-old Charlie Bell who was out throwing dirt clods at his brother and shooting lizards out in the desert. I think Jesus was probably more mature than that. And so therefore they expected him, probably got used to him taking care of himself and being very mature. But at some point, a 12-year-old kid was still under the watch care of his parents. You guys know, you tracking with me? Some of you parents had kids who were problems all the time. Some of you had good kids that never caused problems, but they still needed you. And even though some didn't act out, they were thinking it, and you knew it. So they had to be dealt with. So Jesus was missing in action. And I love because I think it's funny that you think about this, and I'm trying to think of the comedian. It just skipped my mind. The one who wrote "Mary, Did You Know?" Mark Lowry. So Mark Lowry said, "Can you imagine explaining to God that you lost His son?" He said, "I remember I have my brother's kids because Mark is English, I think, and he said we went to Walmart and the kid was hiding in the clothes. We couldn't find him for an hour, and we thought we were the worst parents in the world." We couldn't find our kid. We thought something happened. Everybody was panicking. The whole place was shut down and locked down. It was crazy. And the kid was hiding. Thought it was funny playing hide and go seek in the middle of the clothes somewhere, right? He said, "That's nothing. You lost the Son of God." Not a cool thing, right? So they're rushed back to Jerusalem. And so anyway, they couldn't find him. Verse 46, now so it was, after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. So when they saw him, they were amazed. But listen to what Mary says. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought for you anxiously." Now I thought about this. Surely she never spanked Jesus, because I think that would probably have been inappropriate. I don't know. I say that and we talk about it, but what I thought here was this. Of course, Jesus said, "Why do you seek me? Did you not know that I have to be about my Father's business?" And so there was this interaction between this young man and his mother, because she was his mother. As perfect as he was, she still had to raise him up in a culture and with people, and probably saw at an early age this young man who was more interested in the truth of God than he was in the cultural interpretations of the truth of God, which probably caused him grief all the time. Because I'm telling you, even in a very spiritual, a very religious group, we find in the ministry of Jesus that many times he found himself absolutely going against the grain. And probably Mary had to watch this growing up, that her son didn't always do what he was supposed to do when it crossed the line of what God wanted him to do. Can you imagine, you parents? Sometimes we think, well, she must have had it easy for the perfect kid. I'm telling you, probably the opposite. Because if you have a child that stands up and for God in class and everything else, I'm telling you, you're going to face stuff. We had that, I remember Mary a couple of times. You know, my daughter, there was a couple of times when she stood up in class and the teacher says, well, and he was teaching something about, it was in biology or something like that, and they were teaching about evolution, and she says, well, and she would give her own, and it was like everybody else was caving to this person who was teaching all one-sided, and she says, well, I don't believe that, and this is why, and so here she is, a 16-year-old kid, talking to the teacher and getting him ticked off at her. But she did it respectfully, but you know what? It still didn't make him happy. And that's nothing compared to young Jesus. So here she was. My point is this. So we have Mary basically rebuking Jesus. Why have you done this to us? Don't you know that we're scared and anxious for you? And Jesus goes back not dishonoring, because that would be against the law of Moses. You would never dishonor or disrespect your parents. But the other thing I thought is, God allowed Mary to continue to mother Jesus, even though she was not perfect and never was. She was a woman of faith, but even in this situation, she didn't get it. So you ladies can let yourself off the hook just a little bit. Some of us look back and think, well, I kind of messed my kid up on that one. I hate that. And you're like I am. I mean, I can do something. I can try to model and tell my kids 100 times to do something right. And if I accidentally slip and say some foul word or do something stupid, that's what they're going to model. It's like, it's not fair. I did it one time. And that's what they remember, Dad, when you did that. I went, oh, why do you remember that? That's okay, because God still asks us, even us human beings who are growing in our own faith, to still be parents. Some of you, it's just a miracle that your kids actually made it alive out of, adolescence, because you know it, because we made so many mistakes. And yet God still has asked you to be parents. Why? And there's some people, granted, that have hurt their children so bad, it just seems, we ask God, why would you allow that to happen? We don't know. But yet, the God of the universe still has allowed human beings, as imperfect as we are, to raise his children. He has. And he says, listen, to all you, I will never leave you. I will never abandon you. If father and mother abandon you, I will take you up. And so there's a promise. So here's the point. My point is this. In all of our imperfection, we need to still stay growing in our faith. So Mary started at birth. She didn't stop in her faith there. She kept walking in faith and made her mistakes. She was still a human being. She wasn't Supergirl. She was a human being, made mistakes. She rebuked the Son of God. I mean, literally, so there's some thing, and God, Jesus like, that's okay, Mom. It's okay, calm down a little bit. Let me. You don't ever say calm down by any woman, because that's the last thing that will happen when you do that. Especially to your mom. And I'm glad my dad wasn't there, because if my dad thought I was back-talking, I would have really gotten in trouble. But Jesus wasn't back-talking. He was honestly being honest. But Mary had to still grow. You still have to grow up. Some of you young mothers are going to make mistakes. You're going to have to grow up. You're going to have to get over it. Your children won't respond like you thought they would, and you still have to just keep going on. You have to stay with it. Those kids don't go away. We don't cast them out. Neither does God. He disciplines, but he doesn't cast out. And the reason is, he doesn't ask perfect people to raise our kids. He asks us to raise our kids, but there is one caveat. That is, he expects us to continue to grow in the Lord. Our faith must continue to grow. I think Mary kept growing. She kept taking those steps of faith. Jesus brought her along. It wasn't easy. In fact, I imagine it was hard, double hard. Now, a few other examples. So there he was at that time. Now let's jump forward into the wedding of Cana. And so here we have years later now in the book of John, and we have the wedding of Cana, and Mary is somehow very much integrated in this. And if you've been to that area, you have the area of Megiddo, the valley of Armageddon is right there. But on one side you have Nazareth, way on the one side, on the north side. On the south side you have Cana, and they're not too far away. And so her cousins and people were there, and somehow she was very much an integral part of the wedding planning. And they planned, and they had a lot more people show up, and they ate more food and drank more wine than they would have thought. And it was going to be embarrassing. They were going to run out of wine. And so what does Mary do? She goes to Jesus, and at this point, Joseph's not in the picture anymore, which says some things. One thing, we don't know what happened to Joseph. We never find out what happens to Joseph. But apparently he's passed away. Whenever the father passed away, normally the older son steps up, and he's in the role of being the paternal person. He's the one who is in charge of the family. So it was totally appropriate for Mary to come and say, I love it. She says, Jesus, they're going to run out of wine. Fix this thing. Now that very response of Mary tells me something about Jesus. One is that she had come accustomed to him being able to deal with the issues of her family and of life. We're not sure by the wording if she thought that was going to be some miracle or not. But one thing we do know was she expected him to do something extraordinary, to step up, to get things going. Because I imagine at this time at 30, can you imagine Jesus at 30? He's probably already very, very, very confident, very strong, very in control. He could probably tell people you do this, you do this, you do this. He knew exactly the plan, the strategy, how to get there, how to get things done. Either way, she had learned to trust in her son, but she didn't quite understand the idea that he was now beginning his ministry and that now things were going to change gears. And so Jesus isn't mean to her. He said, Jesus, you got to fix this. And he tells her, woman, now calm down. Now, if I ever told my mom, woman, again, I'm going to get in trouble. I never did that. It wasn't the same. I know it wasn't the word mother, but it was a word that distanced her, not as putting her down, but as saying, listen, my time has not come yet. You don't understand the time frame of God. I have to be very careful about this. Whether he had done, some people believe he had done miracles before, but there's no indication of that in the Bible. We just don't know. Whatever the case is, she had learned to trust in the son that she had raised. And that's an okay thing. But she wasn't perfect. She didn't completely get it. And we find all the way along the way, God didn't ever stop and reveal to her ahead of time everything Jesus was going to do. And she's like, she had to have felt hung out to dry. I don't know about you, but my mom would sometimes look at me and say, so tell me what you're thinking. And that's always a dangerous thing to ask men, because men will probably say nothing and mean it, nothing. I'm just not thinking anything. Women can't get that. A man can actually sit there and go, and just tune out. There's really nothing logical happening there for a while. He's thinking things, but you can't explain it, right? Right, guys? Help me out. Okay, anyway. So here we are. So Jesus did have the human nature, but here's Mary, and she said, do something, fix it. Why? Because she didn't quite get his role. You know why? Because she wasn't perfect. She wasn't the queen of heaven, the mother of God, all that stuff they would lay out. She was just Mary. She was mothering Jesus the best she could, just like every one of you do. And you watch your children at every stage of life, as babies, as children, and then you're trying to solve problems. And mothers are, they're rescuers. They're rescuers. And I say that because the next thing I want to touch on was in the middle of Jesus' ministry, Jesus is starting. He becomes extremely popular. He's teaching around Galilee. Pretty soon he's so popular that the crowds won't even let you breathe. I don't know if you've ever been in a crowd like that. It is scary. Some of you guys have been to other countries, other places where you have been in a crowd where literally you can't breathe. And so when you're like that, you know that if you go down or you fall down, there's nothing you can do. You can't even get back up. I had been in a place like this one time in Argentina. I got onto the train, and the train, which had like 40 people, I think I had 120 people in one car, And so you walk in and you get in there. There's no place to sit. There's not even a place to hang on anymore. You just literally stand in the masses, and you can't fall if you want to do because you're like chink, 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 like this. I literally, in a train full of people, and I was glad that I'm at least 5'11", which is just tall enough to put my nose up and to be able to breathe because there was no air conditioning. And I had my suitcase, my briefcase with me, and I had to literally, because it was so smashed, I had to literally change the contour of my body because it was smashed so together and ride that way for 50 minutes. Right? So, whenever you're talking about crowds are dangerous. And so these people were just crowding around everywhere Jesus did. And finally somebody says, hey, your mom and your brothers are out here calling to get out of there. They're going to kill you. And Jesus said what? Hey, listen, you people who are listening to my word, you're my father, you're my mother and my brothers. And he gave a spiritual lesson. But the truth is, mom, in a natural way, his mom was out there trying to rescue Jesus. Why? Because that's what mom and dads do. She wasn't perfect. She didn't say, oh, that's okay. Jesus is doing the work of his. No, I'm mom. You guys, Jesus' mom's here. Open up. And Jesus' mom says, get him out of there. And Jesus said, it's okay. I love you, Mom, but I got something else to do. You have to understand. Now, listen. I say this because I get a little bit of this from whenever, and some of you have had the same thing with your mom trying to rescue you at a time you really didn't need to be rescued or shouldn't have been rescued. But that's what moms do. Moms love their kids. They rescue them. Whenever Christine and I had gotten married, and she had baby, she had our first baby, and we were like just 22 and very young, and all that thing happened very, very fast, and we weren't prepared for it. Christine had lost her job, and I told you before, we went through a really, really hard time. I was trying to go to school and finish up, and worked a job, and we just found ourselves without money, without food, without anything. We just had nothing. Someday I'll tell you about, and it'll be a real tearjerker. But it's just true. So, back then we didn't have credit cards. We just had to live with what we had, and there wasn't a lot of extra stuff. And so we did this. But now my mom and dad, my parents were divorced. My mother and stepfather lived in my dad, and they all had, they were fine financially, had plenty of money. Christine's mother had enough money. And, they didn't know that we were sitting there eating rice and crackers every day because we didn't have enough and barely able to feed our baby. And my thing was this. I had asked God, I asked God, I said, God, if I'm going to be a missionary, we're going to go over and live by faith our whole life, then I need to know that you are feeding me. I need to know that I can trust you. I can rely on you, that it's not anybody else or any other thing. And some people say, oh, you shouldn't have said that because God's going to answer that prayer. And man, did he, because I tell you what, we got to a point we had nothing. I lost my job. I didn't have anything. And I needed a job now. We were literally eating hand to mouth. We didn't have anything. And so I told this story one time. I never told my parents this because I knew what the reaction was going to be. So I forgot, and one time we were at a church, my mother was there, and I told the whole story about how it happened. We didn't have milk, we didn't have anything for the baby, and we just got on our knees and prayed to God to help us out, and it was God showed us miracle after miracle, day after day, week after week, and grew my faith to realize that I wasn't going to live this life of faith by my own power. I didn't have to. God was going to take care of us. Where God guides, God provides. I learned that. I needed to learn that. And so when the step came, when I got on the plane to go to Argentina later on, that was just the next step. It wasn't some great leap of faith because God had already given us those steps. It's like a child. It's like a motherhood. Motherhood, you're not going to be perfect all the way along the way, but you've got to keep growing because God may ask more and more and more of you. Like Mary, he asked more and more and more of Mary. And so after I told this story in this church, I said, this is what happened, everything else. And my mom's sitting there looking like, and her eyes are growing like this, and she had never heard this story before. And I thought after we get out of the service, she's going to say, son, that was a great sermon. Like she usually tells me, that's a good message. I learned. She said, as soon as I got out of the message, she grabbed my arm. She said, I'm going to whoop you. And if you don't know what that means in Southern talk, that means I'm going to spank you. And I said, Mom, I'm like 26 years old. She said, I don't care. I'm still going to whoop you. Why in the world did you go through that and not tell us? And the reason I didn't is because I'd asked God to do something with us, and he did. I knew that, but she didn't know that. Why? Because she's my mom. Moms and dads are going to rescue. They're going to do everything they can to help. Are you with me? Because that's what moms do. So Mary was doing that. She wasn't lacking faith. She wasn't a bad person. She wasn't not believing that Jesus was who he said he was. She was just mom. Moms, we got to help our kids out, be rescuers. It's okay. Last thing is I was thinking about, and this is the hard one, and that is she had to walk to the cross. But it is last, and it's in order, and it's because before Mary was chosen for the Immaculate Conception, before Mary raised Jesus as a baby and as a child, and before Mary, and as she grew up with Christ in the ministries, before she went to the cross and saw her son crucified, she had to walk in faith in God the entire way. I say all that because we look in horror as we see her looking at her son being crucified. And I'm sure there's nothing in the world that can prepare you for the death of a child. Nothing. Much less the horror that Christ went through. However, having grown up and walked and continued and cultivated your own faith in God will allow you to survive. It's the only thing. I don't know how other people do it. You with me? Sometimes we think life is going to go on without any problems. It won't. You will face difficulties. You will face hardships. Sometimes the hardest of all things. The very best thing you can do for your children now and all the way to the end is grow in your faith in God. Husbands, wives, guardians, parents, that's what we need to do. God will ask of us things we never thought, sometimes never hoped for, and we need to respond as Christ-like and as godly as we can, but the only way you're going to do it is if you are walking with him every day. So that the ask, the leap of faith, at that horrific moment, that hard time, is not some leap of great faith. It's just the next step in our faith in God, because he's led us all the way. I celebrate women. I celebrate motherhood. I celebrate the guardians who raise kids. It is not easy. It is difficult, but do it in God. God created it to be wonderful and beautiful and everlasting, and you'll never stop being a mom. You never stop raising kids. You never stop looking at our generation of children and hoping for and giving for the best of them. Let's just continue to grow in faith so we can walk with them and face things with them, and they'll always be different. So moms, happy Mother's Day. Keep growing in your faith. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren need to see God in you. It will change them. You say, well, Jesus was perfect. I know. He was the exception. But you know what? James, Jesus' half-brother, was the first pastor of the church of Jerusalem. So I don't think it was just Jesus. And they all had to watch him on the cross and go through it. But you know what? I think the faith of their mother was absolutely fundamental. Stand with me, if you will. Happy Mother's Day. I'm glad God called you to be mothers. I'm glad God asked you to stand up and help out. Because I will tell you this, when the home of people of faith in this country falls, the country will fall. No doubt. The structure of what is holding up this country is the home, not even the church. The church is fundamental, but it's the godly home with parents that are growing in the Lord, helping their kids, fighting the battles, winning and losing some, because ultimately the kid will respond in its own way. Some will reject, and it just break your heart. But even that heartbroken father and mother is an absolute treasure to us. To know what and keep what is right or wrong. You are so very important.